Willkommen. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Sean Huggins. This is React with Hugs, and today we have a pretty cool video planned. Check this out. This is, can Germany really become Europe's great military power? Oh, baby. These videos are always fun to check out. It's interesting seeing what people have to say about it. Of course, I want to know what you guys have to say about it, so feel free to leave your mustard down in the comment section below. This is from War Fronts. Check them out. Linked in the description as always. Also, linked in the description is my other reaction channel, my brand new reaction channel. Check it out, Europe with Hugs. It's me reacting to videos from all over Europe, not just Germany. So if that's something that you're interested in, then like I said, check it out. That'll be linked in the description as well. But let's waste no more time. Let's hop straight into, can Germany really become Europe's next great superpower? Again. For the third time, or who knows how many times. Anyways, let's see.
Days after Putin's tanks rolled into Ukraine, Olaf Scholz stood before the Bundestag and declared a Zeitenwende, a turning point. Faced with a newly aggressive Russia on the EU's doorstep, Scholz committed to overhaul Germany's military, to surge defense spending to levels not seen since the Cold War, to transform his nation, in short, into the continent's greatest military power. At the time, Zeitenwende was held as a historic watershed, a moment when Germany finally awoke from its long slumber to assume the mantle of Europe's natural leader. Fast forward to today, though, there are more questions than progress. While things are slowly moving in the right direction, analysts are starting to wonder if hitting Scholz's targets is even possible, if Germany really has what it takes to fulfill the promise of Zeitenwende and at last step out from America's protective shadow. So in today's episode, we're going to dive deep into the dreams and the realities of German rearmament and try to figure out what it means for the future of Europe.
Ooh. Turning point.
In terms of historical breakpoints, few have been quite so clean as the shattering of Europe's post-Cold War peace. On February the 24th, 2022, Vladimir Putin launched his all-out assault on Ukraine, a brutal, genocidal war of conquest that is still continuing as we record this video. A politician waking up in Europe's capitals that cold winter morning, it was clear that something momentous had happened, that life on the continent would never be the same again. Yet for all the full-scale invasion may have shaken places like Tallinn or Warsaw, you could argue that at least initially, nowhere felt this impact as deeply as Berlin. For decades, Germany lived under the comforting assumption that great power conflict would never return to Europe, that the end of the Cold War had created a peace that was indestructible. This was an era in which German politicians spoke of being, quote, surrounded by friends. When Wandel durch Handel, or change through trade, was Berlin's unofficial motto, a motto that suggested you could nudge autocratic regimes like Russia or China toward democracy by simply cultivating economic ties, hence the existence of things like Nord Stream, a pipeline that pumped Germany full of cheap Russian gas, hence too things like former Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder being paid $1 million a year to sit on Gazprom's board of directors. In the world of Wandel durch Handel, Germans could tell themselves this was just a way of ensuring the Kremlin played by the rules. And hey, if it didn't work, it's not like Berlin had anything to fear. Surrounded by friends, Germany could afford to let its military fade to decay into a shadow of what it had once been. The best part, with the United States effectively acting as the nation's security guarantee in the form of NATO, successive governments could redirect that military money elsewhere, to social programs and a welfare state Americans could only dream of. It was, in short, a dreamlike era of...
That is a great point, though. Without a high military budget, you can just redirect that to other places in the country, social programs and stuff. Not so easy to do in America with the $1 bazillion a year that they spend in self-defense military budget.
Prosperity. So, you can now imagine just how deeply jarring it felt to be suddenly woken up. The invasion of Ukraine not only acted like a gigantic bucket of icy water dumped atop Germany's comfortable illusions, it also threatened to destroy everything the country stood for. International Politik magazine has said the assault created an almost existential threat for Germany, writing, quote, Berlin has understood this war as an attack not only on Ukraine's sovereignty, but on core constituents that make up Germany and Europe. That is, as an attack on the security order, the European Union, on a rules-based international order, an attack on Germany's success model.
Damn.
Given such a massive shock, it was perhaps only natural that Berlin would be forced into an equally massive reaction. Taking place on February the 27th, Chancellor Olaf Scholz's speech to the Bundestag came at a moment when things could not have looked bleaker. While reports of problems in the Russian force were beginning to leak out, the operating assumption was that still Ukraine would be defeated in days, that Putin's army would soon be at the gates of NATO. So, Scholz had a lot riding on his speech. To his credit, he more than delivered.
Well, it's good that that hasn't happened yet. You know, Ukraine has still not been defeated as of recording this video. So, still good. Still good that Russia is not on the doorstep of European Union at the time of recording this video.
During Germans were living
Hopefully
through a
that way.
Zeitenwende, the Chancellor denounced Putin's war before making his centerpiece announcement. No longer would the German military be underfunded. Instead, a €100 billion special fund would be created to rearm and turn it into a world-class fighting force. As the government later briefed reporters, Germany is to become Europe's leading military power. It was a hell of a pivot. Combined with a new commitment to pull defense spending up to 2% of GDP, the New York Times noted the speech meant that Germany, quote, would become the third or fourth biggest military spender in the world.
Oh, wow.
And amazingly,
That's a huge turnaround.
This polls after the speech claimed 69% of Germans were on board with Zeitenwende. After decades of default pacifism, Berlin would suddenly oversee one of the greatest armies on earth. Or would it? In the year and a half since Scholz's speech, the Zeitenwende seems to have stalled. A turning point that never quite finished turning. When Germany published its first ever national security strategy this June, The Economist declared, while the strategy usefully clarifies Germany's perceptions and goals, it is less clear about whens and hows.
I think so. I think that there's a lot of inefficiencies with the spending. And of course, you can't just spend a lot of money and automatically have a successful, large military. You have to do it the correct way. And I think that's the problem that Germany's having, if I had to guess. It's not so much the spending itself, it's the efficiency of the spending and the impact of the spending that is misaligned, if I had to guess. Let's see.
It also noted that it didn't advocate for the creation of a much-needed equivalent to America's National Security Council. International Politik, meanwhile, has said that the government seems to have lost momentum. Public opinion, too, has failed to stay behind Zeitenwende. When the Korber Foundation polled Germans in August of 2022 as to whether the nation should become a leading military power in Europe, 68% responded with a firm 9. Despite these headwinds, rearmament remains official policy, a vision for the future that Scholz hopes to fully embrace. And it's our task today to try and figure out if that vision is real or whether it's simply an absurd mirage.
Let's see. Decades of neglect. Bundeswehr.
As the 1990s dawned, they did so on a West Germany that fielded one of the best militaries on the planet. Up to 500,000 soldiers were serving in the Bundeswehr. At the drop of a hat, it could summon 215 combat battalions to fight. That made it one of the largest militaries in the whole of NATO. Nor was it just manpower where West Germany triumphed. With 5,000 main battle tanks, over 2,000 armoured personnel carriers, 24 submarines, and 520 combat aircraft, the Bundeswehr was Western Europe's powerful first line of defence. An army that could maul the forces of the Warsaw Pact if they ever tried to march across the continent. Sadly, a lot's changed in the past 30 years. Were you somehow to magically pluck a general from that bygone decade and dump him into today's Bundeswehr, it'd likely weep at how things have decayed. As of January 2023, Der Spiegel reported that those 5,000 main battle tanks have been reduced to just 300. Those 2,000 plus armoured personnel carriers to 500, and that fleet of 24 submarines to just 6.
Dude, okay, that is a staggering statistic. That's like, 25% maybe of what it used to be, maybe less, 25% or less. Wow. Okay, that's surprising actually. I was not expecting that.
And that's the on-paper numbers, including all those vehicles that are undergoing maintenance or are otherwise unavailable. If Germany were to be invaded tomorrow, it's estimated only 60% of its tank fleet could actually be utilized, and that only around a third of its helicopters and fighter jets would be up and running. A full 1,000 of Berlin's 2,000 artillery pieces can't be activated at short notice. Not that they'd be all that useful anyway. Germany currently only has enough ammunition stockpiled for a maximum of 3 days of combat, and perhaps as few as only 2. As for the soldiers who would actually do the fighting, well, things are hardly in a better state.
Dude, enough ammunition stockpile for 2 to 3 days of combat? What? That's mind-blowing to me. You can't win a war in 2-3 days. Like, what? What's the point even
policy reports
at that point?
The Bundeswehr can today quickly field a mere 34 battalions from a total pool of 183,000 soldiers. So you can probably see what we mean when we say our time-traveling general would be just a little bit upset, right? But even this sorry picture doesn't convey the full and pretty gory details. According to the military's own capability profile, the Bundeswehr needs a minimum of 200,000 free soldiers to be capable of fulfilling all of its functions by 2031. Since 2018, they've been on a recruitment drive, but they've only been successful in plugging gaps filled by retiring service members. With roughly 20,000 leaving each year, the German military is basically having to swim as hard as it can just to stay afloat. In 2021, the NY Times reports that 17.5% of all posts above enlisted rank were empty. Meanwhile, the Air Force is lacking nearly half its jet pilots.
Wow, okay, so there's a huge recruitment problem. Apparently, people don't want to sign up for the military. I wonder why that is in Germany. I mean, I guess if there's a lot of negative press around the German military with how it's not managed well, maybe that's a big deterrent for people wanting to join. But man, that's still shocking to me,
Finally, there's the reported state of the equipment that is available. In late 2022, Berlin staged a training exercise with 18 Puma infantry fighting vehicles, only to abandon it when all 18 of them just broke down. All of this probably raises an obvious question in your mind. And that's
all
how.
18?
How did we go from a world where West Germany was fielding a continent-beating military to one in which a fully unified Germany can barely only offer 2 soldiers called Hans and a slice of bratwurst? But obviously, the end of the Cold War did play a major part. With it seemingly no longer necessary to keep funding the Bundeswehr at its previous levels, politicians could cash in a peace dividend. Likewise, the end of conscription in 2011 doubtlessly didn't help with manpower issues. But the real culprit is the 2008 financial crisis, or at least the government's reaction to it. According to Der Spiegel, Defense Minister Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg committed to reducing the military's budget by 8.3 billion euros over 4 years, a cut so deep that it didn't so much as slice away the fat as, well, saw right through the bone. The effects went beyond just mothballing equipment and failing to buy enough munitions. As part of the savings drive, the Bundeswehr was forced to switch to just-in-time logistics, a form of delivery used by things like supermarkets to eliminate the need for expensive storage space by having goods turn up only when they're needed. If those goods are imported strawberries, there's a lot to be said for this system, but if they're shells for your howitzers, the likely result is a military incapable of fighting a regular war.
Wow, I mean, I get that if you don't need a military, you're surrounded by allies, then you can completely cut spending and put that money to good use for the citizens elsewhere. I get that, and I think that is a great thing to do. But now it's like, you never know what could happen in today's day and age, and now Germany is so far behind on its spending, can it even catch up?
Now we could go on, but you're probably getting the idea by now. To rearm, Germany will first have to spend enough money to return to where it was before all of these cuts. And that's where Scholz's specific pledges come in. Both that of raising defence spending to 2% of GDP and the creation of the 100 billion euro special fund for modernisation. The question we'll be tackling in the next part of today's video is that enough?
Oh, is it enough? Golden guns. Okay.
Now, when talking about his government's rearmament drive, Scholz has been very, very clear about his goals, including making the Bundeswehr to, quote, the best equipped force in Europe, end quote. And this is where the special fund comes in. With the equivalent of $107 billion set aside specifically for purchasing new kit, the intention is for a sharp modernization drive that brings Germany's forces up to scratch. But, as we all know, there's a big difference between intentions and actions, and the recent actions of the government suggest the special fund may not live up to its hype. To understand why, let's look no further than this year's official defence budget. Set at almost 52 billion euros, it's a notable increase from previous years. However, it still only accounts for 1.57% of Germany's GDP, far below the NATO goal of 2%. The reason Berlin is able to say it's abiding by the 2% rule is thanks to the government raiding the special fund to make up the shortfall. In 2023, that included taking almost $20 billion out and redirecting it towards the regular Bundeswehr budget. If that doesn't sound like a big deal, you're not thinking long-term enough. The special fund was sold as coming on top of a defence spending jump to 2% of GDP, an amount that really would have turbocharged Germany's military. Instead, the finance ministry has basically resorted to tricky accounting. The result is both less actual money for rearmament and an unsustainable stopgap.
Tricky.
Assuming the special fund is likewise raided in subsequent years, Bloomberg predicts that it will run dry by 2026. That'll leave a €25 billion euro hole in the Bundeswehr's finances, one the current government has effectively ruled out most methods of filling. Finance Minister Christian Lindner has said that his department will abide by Germany's debt brake rules, which limits federal deficits to 0.35% of GDP. So
I think this guy might be gone now, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. Anyways, let's continue.
So borrowing isn't going to make up that shortfall. Tax hikes too have been ruled out, and the public is likely to find deep social spending cuts to fund the military about as appetizing as a gallon of Brotsuppe. In effect, then, the special fund may be little more than a fig leaf for continued underinvestment in the armed forces, one that conveniently will remain in place for the life of this government, leaving it up to whoever wins the next election to deal with the problem. Isn't politics fun? Not that the value of that fund is going to remain steady. The inflation that gripped Europe over 2022 has already eaten into the fund's spending power, so much so that Defence Minister Boris Pistorius has called for an additional 10 billion euros to make up the shortfall. And this isn't the first time someone's had to point out the impact of inflation on the special fund. Last autumn, Politico reported that Pistorius' predecessor in the defence minister role, Christine Lambrecht, was informed she needed to start spending or watch the fund's value shrink. Rather than move ahead with new orders, her ministry instead scrapped 2 Navy frigates the fund was supposed to deliver. Still, we don't want to give the impression that all is doom and gloom. While American officials are quietly withering about Germany's inability to commit to higher military spending, Boris Pistorius is at least a sensible, methodical guy who is serious about Zeitenwende. Back in March, Pistorius brought in Annette Lendig-Emden as the new head of the military procurement agency with a mandate to get things moving. Since then, Lendig-Emden has been striving to use as much of the special fund as possible for its original purpose. This June, Reuters quoted her as saying 2/3 of the fund is already contractually bound to new purchases, with yet more contracts soon to be signed. And while some of them cover equipment like transport helicopters that the Bundeswehr had planned to purchase even before Zeitenwende, it's not like Lendig-Emden isn't trying. Her agency this year is set to submit 91 procurement proposals for approval, a modern German record. In fact, some analysts contend that this is a sign that, after a long delay, the Zeitenwende might be beginning to turn. That while Scholz's dithering made German defence policy the dog that didn't bark in 2022, the powerful Alsatian is now waking up. It's just not entirely clear that the rest of the government has quite got the message.
Bureaucratic hoops.
In the Franz Kafka novel The Castle, an unnamed man spends hundreds of pages trying to get inside the titular chateau, only to never make it. As with everything Kafka, critics still debate the meaning of this strange story. Is it an allegory for man's struggle to find meaning in a meaningless world? A metaphor for our remoteness from society? From God? And no, don't worry, you haven't accidentally switched the channel to literary criticism of graphics. We bring up Kafka's novel because the idea of seeing a simple goal get blocked by a faceless bureaucratic machine is something German military types will be extremely familiar with. After all, the Bundeswehr is an organization seeming...
Only one thing can stop the German military, and that is German bureaucracy.
designed to turn straightforward military procurement into a Kafkaesque nightmare. The examples are legion. Among the most cited are the decade plus that it took fighter pilots to get new helmets and an ongoing struggle to replace faulty infantry rifles that began in 2015. More revealing, though, might be the state of communications equipment among the German soldiers seconded to NATO. The leaders of their units, the Germans oversee a force comprised of Dutch, Norwegian, and Czech troops, all of whom use modern military standard devices to communicate with one another over secure channels. The Germans, by contrast, use what Army technology is called legacy analog radios and communications equipment dating back 40 years.
40 years!
That just happens to be incompatible with that being used by their fellow NATO fighters. This isn't just a dangerous situation. Analog radio chatter can be easily intercepted, but also an absurd one. The German economy is roughly 15 times bigger than the Czech one, yet the Czechs are able to securely discuss their superior beer on modern devices while German soldiers flounder. Then that's just a side effect of German defense procurement, a process that involves painstaking, multi-year negotiations over even the simplest purchases and allows companies to use regulation and competition rules to challenge ministry decisions. It's not for nothing that Foreign Policy has called the procurement agency, quote, where defense programs usually go to die a slow, bureaucratic death. Good news is that recent legal changes have temporarily suspended some of the more onerous requirements. The double bit of good news is the part we mentioned in the last chapter, the appointment of Annette Lenig-Emden to slap the agency into shape. Still, the red tape swirling around the military is a symptom of the divided, overly legalistic structures forced on it by bygone defense ministers. Thomas de Maizière famously broke it into 3 separate departments with conflicting responsibilities, creating a bloated bureaucracy that wastes time mandating stuff like the grain size of sand at shooting ranges. As International Politik put it, trapped in a regulatory and bureaucratic frenzy, everything is done by the book, but the result is not greater defense capability. To be fair, the mindset behind these rules and regulations was not necessarily a bad one. It was simply one that assumed Europe would be forever at peace, and therefore doing things carefully was better than doing them quickly or at scale. According to defense...
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that makes sense if there's just always peace in the world, but then at that point, there's no need for any military at all. Just get rid of every single military in the world because there's world peace. But unfortunately, that's not reality. So you have to plan for the worst and hope for the best, you know?
Defense expert Sophia Besch. The reality is that German defense procurement systems has been set up for peacetime, but the blanket adoption of rules and requirements from civilian life often is not appropriate for regulating the processes, procedures, and workflows inside the defense sector. And this is the fascinating part of doing this video, trying to figure out at every moment if we're witnessing a Germany that's slowly turning itself in a new direction, or instead watching a country that's become too stagnant to do anything but keep lumbering in the same and bad direction. For now, though, let's give Berlin the benefit of the doubt. Let's imagine that Scholz remains serious, that Pistorius and Lenig-Emden are going to bring the new dynamic energy that they seem to be bringing, and that some political compromise is made to reach the 2% target. What would happen then? And the answer is that Germany might well become a military colossus, because there's another side to the story, one we've deliberately been saving for our final chapter
the
today.
best for last. Let's see.
Zeitenwende isn't just happening, but that it'll be more transformative than anyone could have ever believed.
Oh, Rheinmetall. I've seen quite a few videos on this channel from them. They got some crazy stuff in the works for sure.
Back in the 1970s, one of Australia's biggest military purchases was when Canberra placed an order with Berlin for roughly 100 Leopard tanks. Nearly half a century later, the two capitals announced a brand new deal to ship a similar number of vehicles. Only this time, it wasn't the Aussies doing the buying. At a price of roughly 600 million euros, Berlin had secured 100 Boxer armoured fighting vehicles from down under. This comes on the heels of a different deal inked with America in December to purchase 35 F-35 Lightning II aircraft for 8.3 billion euros, as well as a recent 1.5 billion euro deal with domestic suppliers KMW and PSM for 143 Puma infantry fighting vehicles.
Wow.
And this is just a drop in the ocean compared to other contracts Berlin has been inking. Contracts that will boost the equipment and capabilities of multiple Bundeswehr branches, but it's also going to do something else. It's going to show the world, and particularly their NATO allies, that the Germans really mean it, that they really are planning to become a military power. Of course, as with everything in this video, that statement comes with a caveat. In this case, that more work still needs to be done. Army Technology, for example, has noted that the order for new Pumas needs to be at least doubled compared to the modernization drive among mechanized forces. Still, as signaling goes, it's doing its job. No longer do comments about the German military automatically result in rolled eyeballs among defense experts. And it's not where international purchasers are concerned that the Bundeswehr has the most going for it. That would be in Germany's local defense industry. For all the German military may be bloated, bureaucratic,
German engineering,
starved of funds, there's a whole different story with the private sector. Within the country alone, some 135,000 people work in a sector that's not just worth $30 billion annually, but is also home to some of the world's most important defense companies. Rheinmetall, KMW, Heckler & Koch, MBDA's German subsidiary. For fans of military hardware, putting those names together is like standing before an Olympic podium of the greatest, most high-tech producers in their fields. Rheinmetall alone can produce nearly 500,000 artillery shells a year. MBDA's missiles are in use around the world. Even smaller companies like Rohde & Schwarz can produce military-applicable gear, in their case world-beating encryption systems. It's not for nothing that Foreign Policy recently published a massive article titled "German Defense Companies Could Be Europe's Arsenal of Democracy."
It's interesting that German engineering being applied to defense companies is so prevalent, and yet Germany fell behind the rest of Europe with their defense spending. They have these amazing companies doing all these crazy things, and yet they still fell behind so far. It's interesting to see. You would think that Germany, since they have all these companies in the country, that they would have that you guys would have like a really strong military, and you would have all these state-of-the-art things being made in the country. But it seems like these companies are making all this state-of-the-art stuff and just selling it outside of Germany. Fascinating.
That article in which they noted, and here we'll need to take a deep breath, the German defense sector's key products include air defense systems, mobile short-range and medium-range, ground-based electronic warfare systems, loitering munitions, precision-guided munitions of all ranges and advanced artillery rounds, artillery systems, main battle tanks, armored personnel carriers and next-generation armored vehicles, diesel-electric submarines, digitally encrypted communications, and networking cloud capabilities for modern battlefield management.
Wow.
Can't believe I did that in one breath. While the article mostly argued that Germany wasn't taking advantage of these capabilities, that giant list still shows you just how much capacity and talent Berlin could harness if it wanted to. And although that harnessing has yet to happen, there's nothing to say it won't in the near future. After all, it's remarkable how far Berlin has already travelled in the last year and a half. In the days before Vladimir Putin's unprovoked invasion, Germany was so worried about upsetting the Kremlin that the most Berlin was willing to do was send Ukraine 5,000 helmets. Since then, Scholz's government has come around to supplying main battle tanks, air defences, self-propelled howitzers, munitions, and more. At home, they've slowly begun a new defence spending spree. Onerous rules have been targeted for loosening. There's been a new willingness to engage with the challenges of rearmament, both financial and psychological. Will it all be enough? Well, it's hard to say. While some might see a Zeitenwende gradually beginning to turn, others may only see inertia, a pivot point so corroded by decades of peace that it's become impossible to shift. Which of these interpretations is true is something that will only become clear over the next couple of years. So as we end today's video then, it's with a Germany that may be on the cusp of a generational change, a transformation into a great military power. Certainly, that's an uncomfortable thought for the many Germans who are still haunted by their nation's past. Uncomfortable too for those who wish to get back to how things were before the war, when it seemed like the soft glow of peace over Europe would never fade. Yet fade, it did, and now Berlin is faced with a choice: to become the natural leader much of Europe wants it to be, or to step aside and let a new rising power like Poland take the reins. Whatever the people of Germany decide, it's a decision that is going to reshape European security for decades to come.
Wow. Okay, very informative, very interesting video today. Yeah, this video is a year old now, so I'm curious how the last year since this video came out has gone for the military spending and the progress that the German military has made or not made. I don't know. I have no idea. I think I need an updated video for a progress report. Maybe you guys, the experts, can let me know. How is Germany doing? How is the German military coming along? Is it more efficient now? Is the spending actually doing anything? Let me know your thoughts. Leave your mustard down in the comment section below. And again, if you're interested in more reaction videos, then check out my new reaction channel, Europe with Hugs, linked down in the description. Go check it out. Go subscribe. Bunch of videos up there already and more to come. But that's all the time that I have for today. So thank you guys so much for being here. And as always, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.